Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Friday we will mark 70 years since the Normandy landings, where wave upon wave of Allied forces poured onto the beaches of northern France. It marked the beginning of the final chapter of the Second World War, which preserved the freedoms we enjoy today. So I want to start by honouring the service of those veterans and the memory of their fallen comrades, a feeling I'm sure shared across the whole House. And I'm sure across the House today we will also want to remember and pay tribute to the work of our armed forces over the last decade in Afghanistan. At the end of this year, British combat operations will come to an end. We should be incredibly proud of the service of our armed forces in that country. They have fought to make Afghanistan a more stable country, and a country with democracy and the rule of law, and a country that cannot be used as a safe haven to plan acts of terrorism here in Britain. Mr. Speaker, we grieve for the 453 members of our armed forces who have been lost, and our thoughts are with their families and friends. All of them, and all of the people who have served, have demonstrated, as our Normandy veterans did all those years ago, that they represent the best of our country. Mr. Speaker, by tradition we also, at the beginning of each parliamentary session, remember those members of the House we have lost in the last year. In January, we lost Paul Goggins. He was one of the kindest, most honourable people in the House, and someone of the deepest principle. And Mr. Speaker, at a time when people are very sceptical about politics, Paul Goggins is a reminder of what public servants and public service can achieve. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the proposer of the motion. She gave an excellent speech. So far, so good. It had a sense of history, it had a sense of place, and it had a sense of humour. And reading her background, she can only be described, as we saw from her speech, as one of life's enthusiasts. Before coming to this House, she has had a varied career. As a magician's assistant when a teenager, and then a job nearly as dangerous, running the foreign press operation for President George W. Bush. She made headlines, and she made reference to this for her recent appearance on Splash. And if she'll allow me, I'll quote her admirable line in self-deprecation, because she said about her performance, "I have the elegance and drive of a paving slab." Now, I say unequivocally today, Mr. Speaker, that is wrong. And since she got to the quarter-finals, I'm not sure what it says about the other contestants who were knocked out before. But I can certainly say, Mr. Speaker, that it certainly takes guts to get in a swimming costume and dive off the highboard. Can I say to her, if she's looking for a new challenge, she should try wrestling a bacon sandwich live on national television. Mr. Speaker, in any case, it is clear that today she deserved her place on the podium. Turning to the seconder of the motion, Mr. Speaker, she made an eloquent speech. She came to this House with over 20 years teaching in further education and the Open University behind her. Since being elected in 2001, she has campaigned with distinction on children's issues and has been an assiduous local member of Parliament. She voted against tuition fees, she's described being in the coalition as terrible, and says the Lib Dem record on women MPs is dreadful. Mr. Speaker, by current Lib Dem standards, that apparently makes her a staunch loyalist. But on gender representation, she can take real consolation from the fact that she can now boast that 100% of Liberal Democrat MEPs are women. As she said, she will be standing down at the next election, and for her outside experiences, her wisdom, and her all-round good humour and kindness, which I remember when I was elected to this House, she'll be much missed. Mr. Speaker, before I turn to the Royal Address, let me say something about one of the most important decisions for generations, which will be made in just a few months' time, the decision about the future of our United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, the history of the UK, from workers' rights to to the defeat of fascism, to the NHS, to the minimum wage, is the story of a country stronger together. A country in which representation from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England has helped us to advance the cause of social justice. It is a decision for the people of Scotland, but I passionately believe this kingdom should remain united. Mr. Speaker, the ritual of the debate on the Loyal Address has existed for centuries. Today we do not just debate the Queen's speech. We assert the importance of this House and the battle it has fought over hundreds of years to exercise power on behalf of the British people. But what the recent elections show is that more than at any time for generations, this House faces a contemporary battle of its own. A battle for relevance, legitimacy, and standing in the eyes of the public. The custom of these debates is to address our opponents across the dispatch box in this House. But today, on its own, that would be inadequate to the challenge we face. There is an even bigger opponent to address in this Queen's Speech debate. The belief among many members of the public that this House cannot achieve anything at all, any party in it. About 10% of those entitled to vote at the recent elections voted for UKIP. But as significant, over 60% did not vote at all. And whatever side we sit on in this House, we will all have heard it on the doorstep. You're all the same. You're in it for yourself. It doesn't matter who I vote for. Of course, Mr. Speaker, that's not new. But there is a depth and scale of disenchantment that we ignore at our peril. Disenchantment that goes beyond one party and goes beyond one government. There is no bigger issue for our country and for our democracy. So, Mr. Speaker, the test for this legislative programme, the last before the general election, is to show that it responds to the scale of discontent and the need for answers. In this election, we heard concerns about the way the EU works and the need for reform. We heard deep-rooted concerns about immigration and the need to make changes. But I believe there is an even deeper reason for this discontent. Fundamentally, too many people in our country feel Britain doesn't work for them and hasn't done so for a long time. In the jobs they do and where the hard work is rewarded, in the prospects for their children and whether they will lead a better life than their parents, including whether they'll be able to afford a home of their own, and in the pressures communities face. Above all, whether the work and effort people put in is reflected in them sharing fairly in the wealth of the country. Mr. Speaker, the Governor of the Bank of England gave a remarkable speech last week, saying inequality was now one of the biggest challenges in our country. We should all be judged on how we respond to this question, right as well as left. Mr. Speaker, there are measures we support in this Queen's Speech, including tackling modern slavery, an ombudsman for our armed forces, and recall. But the big question for this Queen's Speech is whether it just offers more of the same or whether it offers a new direction so we can genuinely say we can build a country that works for all and not just a few at the top. For me, this task starts with the nature of work in Britain today. It is a basic belief of the British people that if you work all the hours God sends, you should at least be able to make ends meet. We all, on all sides of this House, say it in our slogans, that you should be rewarded, that those who work hard, play by the rules, should be rewarded for what they do. But we should listen to the voices of all of those people who say their reality today is that hard work is not rewarded, and it hasn't been for some time. All of us will have heard this on all sides during this election campaign. Like the person I met in Nottingham, struggling with agency work, total uncertainty about how many hours he would get. This was his life, Mr. Speaker. This was his working life. Every morning at 5 a.m. he would ring up to find if there was work for him. More often than not, there was none. He had a family to bring up. The fact that this is happening in 21st century Britain today, the fourth richest country in the world, is something that should shame us all. This is not the Britain he believes in. It's not the Britain we believe in. And it shouldn't be the Britain this House is prepared to tolerate. We've seen the number of 0 hours contracts go well above 1 million. We need to debate as a country. We need to debate as a country whether this insecurity is good for individuals, families and the country as a whole. It is not. I give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the right honourable gentleman giving way. He's absolutely right that we need to continue to create more and more jobs. But one of the things that we have to make sure, we've just reduced national insurance by 2,000 for employers. Will he now rule out any increase in employers or employees' national insurance in the future?
Well, I believe we actually called for that proposal first, but I do say to the honourable lady, that there are two schools of thought that we can have about the recent experience of the election. One school of thought says that this country is fine and it's fixed and the economy is fixed. Now, I do not believe that that is the message of the recent elections. Now, we must debate as a country. Whether we should be prepared. I'm going to make a bit more progress. We must debate as a country whether we should really be prepared to do something about this problem, and we need to debate the wider problem. 5 million people in Britain. 5 million people in Britain, that's 1 in 5 of those in work, are now low paid. And this shocking fact, for the first time on record, most of the people who are in poverty in Britain today are people in work, not people not in work. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman giving way. Can I agree with the right honourable gentleman that politics cannot be the same, and in that spirit, would he be clear and transparent and rule out once and for all, should he enter Downing Street, God forbid, that there would be no new tax on employment, either employer or employee national insurance contribution increases?
Mr. Speaker, we want to see taxes on employment fall. That's why we've proposed a 10p tax rate, to actually make work pay for people. Now, 5 million people in Britain today, that's 1 in 5 of those in work, are now low paid. And this shocking fact, as I said, for the first time on record, most people are people in work, not people out of work, who are those in poverty. So much for hard work paying. Now, none of our constituents sent us to build an economy like that. And at a time when we face significant fiscal challenges into the future, it is costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. It is no wonder people in this country don't think this House speaks for them. To show a new, I'm going to make a bit more progress, to show a new direction for the country and show it is not just more of the same, the Queen's speech needs to demonstrate to all of those people that it can answer their concerns. Now, there is a bill in this Queen's speech covering employment. But the bill we need would signal a new chapter in the battle against low pay and insecurity at work, not just business as usual. Now, what would that involve? It would set a clear target for the minimum wage for each Parliament, so that we raise it closer to average earnings. If you are working regular hours for month after month, you should be entitled to a regular contract, not a 0 hours contract. Mr. Speaker, if dignity at the workplace means anything, it should clearly mean this. We could make it happen this Parliament and show the people of this country that we get what is happening, but this Queen's speech does not do that. Now, Mr. Speaker, Britain, like countries all around the world, faces a huge challenge of creating the decent middle-income jobs that we used to take for granted. And many of these jobs will be created by small businesses. There is a bill in this speech on small business. But we all know, he says here, we all know we have a decades-long problem in this country of banks not serving the real economy. Companies desperate to expand, to invest, to grow, can't get the capital they need. For all of the talk of reforming the banks, is there anyone who really believes the problem has been cracked, with lending to small businesses continuing to fall? Now, the choice we face, Mr. Speaker, is to carry on as we are, or say the banks need to change. Break up the large banks so we tackle our uncompetitive banking system and create regional banks that properly serve small business. But, Mr. Speaker, the Queen's speech doesn't do that. And a Queen's speech that was setting a new direction, Mr. Speaker, would also be tackling another decades-long problem that's happened under governments of both parties, and will be devolving economic power away from Whitehall to our great towns and cities. If I can say this, Mr. Speaker, Lord Heseltine was right in his report. We do need to give our towns and our cities and our communities the tools to do the job. Even more importantly, when there is less money around. More powers over skills, economic development and transport, and the government should be going much further. But none of that is in the Queen's speech. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Right Honourable Shadow Minister for giving way. Does he or does he not rule out a jobs tax on workers in my constituency in Skipton and Ripon, should he get into power?
Mr. Speaker, here we have it. We have deeply serious questions that this country is wanting answered. And what do they do? And what do they do? And what do they do? They get every Tory backbencher to read out a planted whips question. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, no wonder the public hates politics. No wonder the way they hate that this side behaves. So the first thing this Queen's speech needed to have done is signal a new direction in the jobs we create in this country and whether hard work pays. And it does not rise to the challenge. Oh, I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way to the question that I've obviously been given by the Chief Whip. In his opening and thoughtful part of his speech, he called for a different form of politics. As soon as he gets onto the detail, it's business as usual, and he criticises us for doing the same. Can we go back to his first speechwriter, who was actually giving us something rather interesting?
Mr. Speaker, let me just say to the honourable gentleman, the man who called for a pact with UKIP clearly has great confidence about the prospects of the party opposite and their ability to win the election. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me come to the childcare bill, because we support measures on childcare, which is part of the cost of living crisis. Although the scale of that challenge means we could go further on free places for 3- and 4-year-olds. And we also support the bill on pensions, although we want to ensure people get proper advice to avoid the mis-selling scandals of the past. But the next task for this Queen's speech is to face up to another truth. For the first time since the Second World War, many parents fear their children will have a worse life than they do. No wonder people think that politics doesn't have the answers when this is the reality people confront. And nowhere is that more important than on the issue of housing. We all know the importance of that, to provide security to families. And we know it matters for the durability of our recovery too. The Bank of England has warned that the failure to build homes is their biggest worry. And this is a generational challenge which hasn't been met for 30 years. We are currently built... The Honourable Lady says from a sedentary position, yeah, and I say it hasn't been met for 30 years. And part of the challenge we face, is facing up to the long-term challenges. I do say to the honourable gentlemen and ladies opposite, though, who are shouting, in no year of this government have there been as many housing completions as in any year of the last Labour government. So it is a long-term challenge that we all have to face up to. Now, we are currently building half the homes we need, and on current trends, the backlog will be 2 million homes by 2020. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Will the Leader of the Opposition confirm that in 13 years of a Labour government, fewer council houses were built than even under the Thatcher government?
What I can say is that we built 2 million homes under a Labour government, and we've had a faster rate of house building. But look, we've had a faster rate of house building than under this government. And I've said to the honourable gentleman and to the honourable lady that we face a big long-term challenge in this country. And the question is, are we going to face up to it, or are we going to just carry on as we did? Now, Mr. Speaker, this Queen's speech proposes a new town at Ebbsfleet, which is fine, but it does not do enough to set a new direction in building homes. What is the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem is of a market that's not working, with a small number of large developers not having an incentive to build at the pace we need. We know there is a problem of developers getting planning permission, sitting on land and waiting for it to accumulate in value. There are land banks, Mr. Speaker, with planning permission for over 500,000 homes. Now, we can either accept that or change it. We could give councils powers to say to developers, use the land or lose the land. But they refuse repeatedly to do that. And we could give councils the right to grow where they need more land for housing. And this House could commit today to getting 200,000 homes built a year, the minimum we need. Mr. Speaker, that is, after all, what in the 1950s a one-nation Conservative Prime Minister did. But the speech does none of these things. And, Mr. Speaker, a Queen's speech rising to the challenge on housing would also do something for the 9 million people who rent in the private sector. Over 1 million families with 2 million children with no security at all. Children who will start school this September, but their parents will have no idea whether they will still be in their home in 12 months' time. And we wonder why people are losing faith in politics. Now, Mr. Speaker, when we published our proposals for 3-year tenancies, some people said they were like something out of Venezuela. Mr. Speaker, if something as modest as this is ridiculed as too radical, is it any wonder that people who rent in the private sector don't think that this Parliament stands up for them? Let me say, these proposals would not transform everything overnight, but they would tell 9 million people renting in the private sector that we get it and something can be done. It is not an insecurity we would be willing to accept, so why should other people have to accept the insecurity they face? And, Mr. Speaker, there is another area where people are fed up being told there is nothing that can be done. Their gas and electricity bills. It is 8 months since Labour called for a freeze on people's energy bills. Just this week, we've seen figures showing that companies have doubled their profit margins. This is a test of whether this House will stand up to powerful vested interests and act, or say that nothing can be done. The companies can afford it, the public need it, the government have ignored it. This Queen's speech fails that test. The test also, Mr. Speaker, for this Queen's speech is whether it responds to the anxieties people feel in their communities. I do say to the honourable gentleman, shouting from a sedentary position, that is another thing people hate about this Parliament. We all know. Well, we're seeking improvement, Mr. Speaker, we're seeking improvement. We all know that one of the biggest concerns at the election was around immigration. I think it's important, this is an important point. I believe immigration overall has been good for the country. I believe it as the son of immigrants. And I believe it because of the contribution people coming here have made to our country. But we all know that we must address the genuine problems about the pace of change, pressures on services and the undercutting of wages. Now, some people say we should cut ourselves off from the rest of the world and withdraw from the European Union. Mr. Speaker, in my view, they are profoundly wrong. We have always succeeded as a country when we've engaged with the rest of the world. That is when Britain has been at its best. Now, there are others who say that nothing can or should be done, and I believe they're wrong too. We can act on the pace of change by insisting on longer controls when new countries join the EU. We need effective borders where we count people in and out. And Mr. Speaker, this House could also act on something that we all know is happening in our communities, which is to tackle the undercutting of wages. Not just increasing fines on the minimum wage, but proper enforcement and stopping... I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm sure the entire nation is grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for allowing the British people now to be able to speak about immigration, when they've denounced many of our fellow citizens who have spoken out on this matter as racist. Will the Leader of the Opposition now apologise? Will he now apologise for the policies of the previous Labour government, which admitted uncontrolled migration of 2.2 million people into this country deliberately? The result, huge pressure on our social services and a massive increase in the demand for housing, which he has already referred to.
Let me say to him plainly, Mr. Speaker, it isn't prejudice to have concerns about immigration. He's right about that. And we should have longer transitional controls. And I've said that on many occasions. But the question is, what are we now going to do about this problem? Are we going to tackle what is happening in our labour market? And I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, I don't understand why the government isn't taking action on these issues. Employers crowding 10 to 15 people into a house to sidestep the minimum wage. We all know it's happening. Gang masters exploiting workers from construction to agriculture. We all know it's happening. Stopping employment agencies from only advertising overseas or being used to get around the rules on fair pay. We all know it's happening. I'm not going to give way, no. It's no wonder people lose faith in politics politics when they know it's happening and Parliament fails to act. And if this House thinks these things are wrong, then we should do something about them. Mr. Speaker, responding to the concerns we have heard about work, about family, about community, is the start this House needs to make to restore our reputation in the eyes, I'm not giving way, to restore our reputation in the eyes of the public. At the beginning of this speech, I said there is a chasm between the needs and wishes of the people of this country and whether or not this House and politics is capable of responding. We need to rise to this challenge, but this Queen's speech doesn't do it. But it can be done. And that is the choice this country will face in less than a year's time. This is what a different Queen's speech would have looked like. A make work pay bill to reward hard work. A banking bill to support small business. A community bill to devolve power. An immigration bill to stop workers being undercut. A consumers bill...
Mr. Cairns, you've done quite a lot of yelling loutishly from a sedentary position, which doesn't greatly advance your cause. But I invite you to note, order, I'll deal with it, and it's not difficult. The Leader of the Opposition is not giving way, and the honourable gentleman should therefore exercise his judgment. The Leader of the Opposition.
This is what the Queen's speech should have done, Mr. Speaker. A make work pay bill to reward hard work. A banking bill to support small businesses. A community bill to devolve power. An immigration bill to stop workers being undercut. A consumers bill to freeze energy bills, a housing bill to tackle a housing crisis, and an NHS bill to make it easier to see your GP and stop its privatisation. To make that happen, Mr. Speaker, we need a different government. We need a Labour government.